let's get to the reason why we're here tonight. April Dunford. She is the founder and consultant of Ambient Strategy. She's the author of this great book, obviously awesome. She's a positioning expert, and she's a board member, advisor, investor. She's a great speaker. She's spoken here before. I'm really excited to have her back. So a couple of things, I guess. One question to this idea of a positioning narrative sounds super interesting. Who in the org should be driving this?
Right.
I'm sure a lot of people wondering this.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is the thing. Like, if you go to like a typical software company and you talk about positioning, I think positioning is kind of a team sport. Like, often it's product marketing that drives that. It's either product marketing. If product marketing does not exist, then it's product or it's marketing. And they drive the effort, but it's kind of a team effort to get it figured out. And executing on the positioning is definitely a team effort, right? Like, we're going to execute on the position across product, marketing, sales, customer success. So it's kind of a team thing. Now, when we get to this idea of, okay, well, we need to build a story around this narrative, we get in this thing of like everybody pointing a finger at everybody else. So if you go to sales and say, well, who builds the narrative for the sales team? Sometimes the salespeople will say, well, we do. But do they have a process for doing that? No. Do they have a structure for doing it? Generally, no. Generally, no. So most of the companies that I work with, they kind of smashed something together. They iterated on it until they had something that they thought worked. Ideally, if you're doing this properly, sales would look to product marketing to figure that out or to help them figure that out, because it comes from and it comes from everything else. If what I'm actually doing is building a narrative that paints a picture of the market and the alternatives and my differentiated value within that, like, I actually think who would know how to do that better than product? Right. Like, we certainly not going to do it without product's input, because we understand alternatives and differentiators better than anyone else. Right. So in the work that I do, doing positioning stuff, we'll get this cross-functional team together that's marketing, sales, product, customer success, founders, and we'll work on the positioning. But then the minute we have the positioning, we'll then work on this narrative and say, okay, well, now that we got the positioning, let's just map it to the narrative and see how we tell the story. And often for that cross-functional team, who then has to go back and communicate this positioning to their groups, like, that's often where the light comes on. Like, intellectually, we can say, oh, okay, we compete against these guys and we're different this way, and our value is this, and these are the people we're going after. But it's really different to say, okay, well, how do we pitch that then? How do we tell the story of that then? Right. And so I think there's no way for us to build this without heavy involvement from product, because product knows all the stuff. Right. Yeah. And I think, to your point, I like the if, because sometimes product marketing isn't staff. Sometimes you don't have that. It's just, it depends on different configurations. The interesting thing there is, I would just say, living in the product world, some people should be able to do that. But sometimes, again, maybe you don't have senior product people on your team. You've got junior product people that are just in there running the Scrum process. And to try to get them to have a 10,000 foot view, they're like, I'm doing story points and shipping stuff every 2 weeks. So I don't, that sounds amazing, but is it more like the director level or more like GP? I'm just wondering what. Well, so in the work that I do, when we're working on positioning stuff, we've typically got the executive team together. Right. And so it's a cross-functional effort where I've got head of product, head of marketing, head of customer. Right. So it's definitely a more senior level person. Generally working on this stuff. Got it. Yeah. So given that caveat, I would definitely agree with you. The senior person in product should be able to make significant contributions on this. That makes a lot of sense. And just to be really clear, it sounds like, before you can do the positioning narrative, you have to have an agreement on your positioning, right? This is part of the reason why we're so bad at this, right? Generally, if the positioning is sloppy, then there isn't a story to tell. Right. Then if we don't have a story to tell, then we'll just default into, well, let me just show you how it works. I'm logging in. Here's me doing some stuff. You tell me whether you want to buy it or not. Right. And I think one thing is, well, maybe there's a positioning, but it's not that clear. The other thing I would just say is, like,
I think a lot of companies don't even have a positioning, right? So I mean, since you work with a lot of companies, I'm curious, like what percentage of companies ballpark would you say have a clear positioning in place?
Well, so here's the thing, like you have positioning, whether you like it or not. There's a question about whether or not your positioning's any good. Right. So if you are positioned in the market, you might not like it.
Right.
But you have a position in the market.
I see.
And so the thing that's interesting, like what we do in the work I do is it's like we're trying to get the best possible positioning for the product that we have right now in the market right now. A lot of the companies that come to me, what they have is positioning that's kind of weak. And so, so if I take Postman as an example, well, actually, no, they're not a good example. I roll that back. Let's take Level Jump as an example. So Level Jump, I thought, did a very good job of pitching their differentiated capability, which was that they were built on Salesforce. But I think where they weren't doing as good of a job at the beginning was, well, so what? Yeah. Like you're built on Salesforce, who cares, right? And they would say a lot of things. Like they'd say, oh, well, it's really easy for the reps to get access to it because they're already in the tool. It's like, is that actually valuable? Like, does anyone care? Like Docebo seems to be selling a lot of LMS and they got to log into something different for that. Like, is that really a problem having to log into something separate for sales? And like, it didn't sound all that valuable, right? Or they'll say, oh, well, you could serve up the training at the exact moment they want it. Maybe, right? But it took us a while and sort of talking about it. Like, really the big thing is being able to measure the results. If I'm the head of sales enablement, I roll out an enablement program. Did it work or not? How do I prove that to my boss? And so what we're trying to do in the positioning is get really focused. Like, I understand what the differentiated capability, you're built on Salesforce. Nobody else is. Great. So what? And then the so what of that was, well, what I can actually do is deliver sales enablement that drives results. So faster time to first deal, faster time to make quota. And because I can measure it, I can improve on it. So, we can show you all these stats, like every day of improvement in sales ramp time saves you X amount of dollars, blah, blah, blah. You increase your revenue much. Right. So most companies, I think, if there's a place they can tighten up their positioning, it's this differentiated value piece. They understand the features, and that's why they're demoing the features. That's why they're talking about features. Right. They maybe not necessarily have gone all the way to translating the features to value. Right. Like why it matters, why it's important to customers. Companies that are successful and growing like crazy, whatever, generally they've got that. Like you look at it, it's like, well, could we tighten it up? We could always make it a little bit tighter. Sure. But the companies that are doing well and growing fast, like generally they know exactly what their differentiated value is. That's the reason people pick them over all the other options. Right. They may not be telling the story as clearly. Right. But people inside the company know it. What we're trying to do is translate that into a story that makes it super clear for customers. Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. And back to your point, just to build on, you said, hey, you have a positioning, whether you've kind of done it or not. It makes me think of like passive positioning versus, I guess, proactive positioning. And what we're advocating, I mean, you're right. If you're not deliberate about it, people in the marketplace will just have an opinion about where you fit in the category, I guess. That's right. What we're talking about here is being proactive about it, right? That's right. And like most companies that are really good on their positioning are very proactive about it. Like, like at the beginning, for example, Postman was always getting confused. Like they would do the pitch and people would say, well, wait a second, how are you different than an API gateway? I just don't get it. Right. Or they'd say, well, we already have testing tool and you guys do testing. So why do I need you? And like, does this actually replace CI/CD? And so until they got that story really tight, people had a really hard time. Like, I don't get this platform thing. Like, what exactly does the platform do? And so they went through some iterations on their positioning. Like, so for a while, they were like an API collaboration platform, which is kind of getting at it. But even that was confusing. Like people were like, so wait, so it's gateway or is it not a gateway? It's just collaboration, but I still need my gateway. Like, how does that work? Now I think what they've got is their story is so tight that when you look at their website and you look at their stuff, it's a bit like, well, what else would it be? Like, what else could it be? Like, it seems so obvious, but it was hard work to actually get there. And then, the product itself evolved over time. They weren't that at the beginning, but they became that. And so, they had different positioning when they were starting out, and then they became this big platform. And it was like, okay, now we got to do a better job of telling the story of this.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good thing too, especially for people that are startups or V1 products. Your positioning will evolve and iterate over time, right? So Absolutely. It's not like you're not going to nail it right away. So it's almost like a feedback loop with the market to help you understand what the questions are, what's resonating, right?
Well, that's it. And then the biggest thing about positioning is that if you think about it, positioning describes why should you pick my product over all the other alternatives if you're a customer that looks like, one of my best fit customers. But here's the thing, all of those things are changing. Right? Your product is changing. The alternatives are changing. So like the product in the state it is right now, you can say, oh, well, these are my differentiators. But if I fast forward a year from now, well, maybe your competitors caught up with you, or maybe you built some new stuff and now you're way ahead in something different. Right. And so your product's changing, the market is changing, therefore your differentiators are changing, therefore your differentiated value is changing. And then you've got the added complexity of like, I got customers and they change too, right? So, we weren't in a recession. So I was all go trying to grow. So I'm trying to buy tools that help me grow. Well, now we're in a recession and I'm trying to conserve cash. So I'm looking for things that help me conserve cash. So what's valuable to a customer changes depending on the, happening, and their priorities change. And so usually what we end up doing with positioning is we're looking at the positioning for, like, again, best possible narrative that explains why pick my stuff right now. But I got to keep checking in on that every 6 months where I come back to it and say, well, has anything changed? So are there any different alternatives? Are we still fighting against the same people we're always fighting against? And then what about differentiated capabilities? Are they still, is this still the list, or did some things they caught up or we got ahead? Right. And then if I look at how that maps to differentiated value, is the value the same or has it changed? And if it's changed, we're going to have to adjust the positioning. Right. And most of the products you know and love now, if you roll it back to their like 10 years ago, it's absolutely different. Totally.
Yeah. In my workshop, I love to use Airbnb as a case study, and I pull out their initial pitch deck, and their initial main benefit they focused on was saving people money.
Right.
I don't know about you guys, but when I book an Airbnb these days, I don't feel like I'm saving money. I'm paying for service fees and cleaning fees. So it's more about choice and, choice and optionality.
They're really leaning into this experience thing. You're going to have all these crazy places you can stay at, and you're staying there because it's not a hotel experience. It's
right. Yeah.
And same thing with, like, we talk a lot about, like, Salesforce is everybody's favorite example, right? But Salesforce, when they first launched, they were CRM for SMBs. That's what they were. Right. Everybody forgets that, right? They didn't sell to anybody that had more than 10 salespeople. And then their killer differentiated value was you could actually use this CRM without having an IT department involved.
Right. Not being on-prem, just being in the cloud. Yeah.
There's no software thing. You don't have to have IT involved. And at the time, all the CRMs, they were like super IT heavy. You weren't going to deploy that thing without a lot of IT involvement. There was nothing good for SMBs. It was wide open. So they were a niche play in the CRM market. But if you look at them now, they're arguably the worst possible choice for an SMB. I mean, and all their focus is on, big enterprise.
Well, like a lot of B2B companies, you start an SMB and then there's only one direction you go. Everybody goes up market. We're going enterprise, right?
That's where the money is, man.
Exactly. Yeah. Cool. Well, one thing I want to go back to, and JC commented here, really liked it. It's a team effort. I agree. It should be a team effort, cross-functional collaboration. As we know, not every company has amazing cross-functional collaboration. We have sometimes more silos. And I've seen something happen that I would love to get your thoughts on, is where product is doing their thing, building the product with whatever strategy and roadmap they have, and marketing is doing their thing, and they're just never the twain shall meet. There's no connectivity between it. So I'm just wondering, how common is that? why does that happen? And how do we, for companies that are in that situation, what advice would you have?
Yeah. Super common. Super common. And the same thing with sales, right? So we throw sales in the mix, sales isn't working with products. Sales isn't working good with marketing. They're out there cowboying around, doing their own thing, making up stories on the spot. And so all this is bad. Like, in my experience, like back when I was working inside companies, like if I was working on positioning, for example, like I would never embark on a positioning thing on my own in marketing because it's pointless, right? If I come up with a change in positioning, if the sales is not going to like it, if they're not involved, they're just going to say, piss off. We don't, we like our own cowboy story, lady, go away. And then same thing with product, right? If I just work on a bunch of stuff, product people are just going to be like, this does not concern me. This story stuff, it does not concern me. We're over here making a roadmap for the future. Shut up, right? And so what I would usually do is I would start with sales because sales is the easiest, right? So I'd go to sales and I'd listen in on sales calls and I'd be like, looking for the signs of weak positioning, right? And the signs of weak positioning are this. You get in, your rep is doing some kind of a pitch or something, and people just don't get it. And people are like, so what is it? I gotta go back up to the beginning. What is this thing again? And so you'll feel that, right? And the other thing you'll hear is people comparing you to alternatives that you don't actually compete with. So they'll say, oh, so you're just like Salesforce. And you're like, no, I'm nothing like Salesforce. So I'd start with sales and be like, here's what I hear in these conversations you have with customers. Like, that seems bad. And sales will say, it is bad. We hate that. It takes us three meetings before the light comes on and whatever. And I'll say, like that sounds like in marketing, we call that positioning. And have we ever done a thing to like sit down and look at the positioning? And the answer is always no.
Of course.
And then I'll say, you know what? I think we should get a group together. Are you with me on this? Because this could really help you guys. Yeah. Okay. Then I go to product and I say, look, I've been sitting over in sales and people think we compete with Salesforce. Like, what is up with that? And they'll have that conversation with the product side of the house. Like, what is up with that? Like, do we worry about that? Like, people don't even get what we are. Like, and when I listen to the sales reps pitch stuff, like they're talking about this feature, but they're not really getting at the value. Like, you guys spend all that time, energy, and effort building this functionality. But if I go over to sales, they have no idea how to pitch it. Like, and no wonder we're not selling. And we all need to sell, right? Otherwise, we don't have jobs. And so if I can convince product and sales that it was worth looking at it, not that we're necessarily going to change the positioning, but it's just worth looking at it, then I can tell the CEO. Then I go to the CEO and I say, hey, I know you want me to just drive a bunch of leads and stuff because that's my job in marketing, but I'm hearing this on the sales side. And I think sales and product folks, are kind of in agreement with me. Maybe we need to sit down and look at it. Yeah, nice. You give us 2 days, we can get this done.
Nice. Actually, related to that, I saw you posted about a positioning sprint.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell us about it? Sounds like more than 2 days, but it sounds like it's not more than too long.
Yeah, this is a little experiment I'm doing with online training that I don't know whether it works or not. You guys come and tell me later if you take it. But I partnered up with these guys. They're called Section 4. I don't know if you know Scott Galloway. He's like an internet personality. Yeah. Yeah. So he's got this company and they do training, like executive training. And it's a 2-week video course. It's a sprint. They call it a sprint. It's a 2-week thing, but it's training for individuals. My course is really about if you're a person inside the company that wants to know how to manage one of these positioning exercises in the company, come take this training and we teach you how to do that.
Got it.
So it's an add-on to the book. Like the book is to explain that as well.
Got it. Okay.
It's a bit more into the gnarly details of like, how do I convince my boss? How do I convince sales to participate? What do I do? Because everyone thinks positioning is stupid. And how do I sell them?
Right. Got it.
Kind of and then
how to do that? The Jedi mind trick you just showed us about. First you go to sales, then you go to product.
Yeah.
Nice. Good. Okay, cool. But it's 2 weeks.
It's two weeks, like it's self-paced. So it's as however many, I don't know how many hours of video training it is.
Yeah.
And then we do a couple of live sessions where we get people get their questions answered and all that stuff. And then they do like section 4 is very pro on this stuff. So they give you assignments and there's group work and all that stuff. But I don't actually do that much with all that because they have these teams that do that stuff. I show up for the live classes and whatever, but it's all my stuff in the video, and it's me. I'm the instructor.
Great. Well, I was just checking because design sprints are only 5 days. They're, half as long.
If you're doing a positioning sprint inside a company, I think you can get it done in 2 days.
Oh, there we go. See, now you're looking at that.
This is the training to teach you how to be the person that leads this.
Yeah. There you go. 40% faster than design sprint. You heard it here.
Typically, I get it done in 2 days. When I do with clients, everyone gets exhausted and distracted if I trap them in a room for 2 straight days. So instead we do 3 half days and we spread it out.
You spread it out. Yeah. Cool. Nice. Awesome. Cool. Well, that's great. Cool. Very cool. We have some questions. We'll jump in and start doing questions now. Why don't we go Matt B?
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, April, for having me. I was just thinking back to some sessions I've attended and some classes on product strategy, and some folks have been talking about this, and it really kind of resonated with what you said tonight. I feel like we should be starting with positioning first, perhaps, and using that to inform strategy, and then setting out, at some point to building the actual product. In other words, working backwards. What are your thoughts on that, April?
Yeah, so I got some opinions about this. So here's what I think. I think there's a little bit of danger in that. I think what we have is we got the vision, right? So the vision is here's where we want to be, like in 5 years, 10 years. This is what you sold to the VCs, right? Like this is the vision. This is where we want to go. And then we got a strategy that takes us there, right? And so I'll give you an example. I worked at this company and we had this vision. We were going to be the world's greatest enterprise CRM. That was our jam, enterprise CRM. We're going to win the whole market. But we couldn't just jump straight to like world's greatest enterprise CRM because there's a great big competitor in the market that already owns that. So we got to figure out what our beachhead market is and then how we're going to expand there. So our strategy was, we had this thing that was really fancy for investment bankers. We were going to sell investment bankers first. And then once we were good with the investment bankers, then the strategy, step 2 on the strategy was we would sell to retail banks. And then step 3 on the strategy was, well, retail banking would allow us to get into insurance. And then we would be, then we do that. And then step 4 was, well, at that point we'd be a giant company. So then we would take on the leader in the market and be CRM for everybody. Now, the positioning, if you think, so I got the vision, I got the strategy that says, here's the steps I'm going to take to achieve the vision. Positioning is kind of the story I tell at each one of those steps. So at the beginning, the positioning was, we're the world's greatest CRM for investment banks. Here's why investment banks should buy our stuff. This is the value we get for an investment bank. But then at step 2, we became CRM for banking. All kinds of banks, investment banks and retail banks. So then we had a story around that. And then in step 3, we became CRM for financial services. And here's why anybody in financial services should use our stuff. And it works real nice between investment banking, retail banking, and insurance. And we really get this stuff. And then the final one would be, we're the world's greatest enterprise CRM. If you're a big company with complex stuff, we're the best ones to buy. So typically what we have, if it's a brand new product, and it's not out in the market yet, typically we have kind of a longer term vision. We may have this strategy how to achieve it. And the step 1 thing we have is what I would call a positioning thesis. And the positioning thesis before we launch is like, okay, we think these are our competitors, based on our research. Our thesis is these are our competitors. We think this is what makes us different. Therefore, this is the value we can deliver that no one else can. Therefore, these kind of customers are going to love us. Therefore, this is the market we're going to win. And that's my step 1 positioning. But it's just a thesis. Like, when I'm still building the product, I've got this thesis. And then I launch the thing, and my first wave of customers are all about validating the thesis. Like, Was I right? maybe not. And in my experience, we launch it and we're kind of right, kind of wrong, right? So we got some of it right. We didn't get all of it right. And then we're going to adjust the positioning, get it really tight based on what we know from the first, and then we're going to run at it. But then, like we were talking about before, that positioning is going to evolve over time because the market's going to change, our product's going to change. And so we don't expect that positioning is going to stay the same forever. It probably isn't. Because usually what we've got is this vision that takes us somewhere else. Not always. Sometimes the thing stays the same, and our plan is to just grow up as the market grows up, and we just surf the wave all the way to being a big company. But most of the time, what we've got is, we got a goal to be here, but we got to take some steps to get there. And the positioning is going to change at each one of those steps. So I do think there's great value in having, in formulating and documenting your positioning thesis at the development phase where, pre-launch. And then once you're launched, that first wave of customers is all about validating the thesis. Like, is that true? And then do we need to adjust the positioning based on what we've learned from there? And then we tighten it up and we go. And we keep going until such time that our product or the market or something has changed, and then we need to change the positioning. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. Thank you.
All right, great. Thanks, Matt, for your question. Next up, we have Meta.
Thanks so much for a fantastic book and this great talk as well. You talked just now about how the position changes over time. I'm wondering whether the narrative that you use should be different for different situations, for example, sales versus marketing, and for different sort of segments of customers. If you're looking to sort of target very different customer segments, should you have very sort of specific narratives for each of them, or is that just too confusing for everyone?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I get this a lot with companies come and ask me, well, like we serve these two different segments. And so shouldn't our positioning be different for those two segments? And therefore the positioning story is different for those two segments. And the answer is sometimes, but generally no. And so here's why. So generally it works like this. So if we think about how we do the positioning, right? It's like, who's my competitor? What are the things I got that the competitor doesn't have? What's my differentiated value? Who am I going after? So the only reason that the positioning would be completely different for these two segments is if I was against completely different competition and therefore had different differentiated capabilities. Therefore, my differentiated value was different, right? Which conceivably you could have, right? I'm serving these guys, my competition is this, and I'm serving these guys, my competition is this. But as product people, think about that. So what does that mean? Well, that means their requirements over here are completely different than their requirements over here. Like if truly we have that situation, then the requirements are different. And what happens? We end up with two products, whether we want them or not. And so most of the time, when we have a situation where we are serving multiple segments, in practicality, when we sit down and do the positioning is the same because the competitors are the same, the differentiated capabilities are the same, the differentiated value is the same. And so I'll give you an example. I worked at this company and we had this database thing and it was like, I'm going to do a bad job explaining it. But what it did was this like hot backup thing. So if you had the live production database and it was running on this kind of a system, but you had a backup and it was running on this kind of system, if this one went down, it could do the recovery and switch over to the backup in like a sub-second, like it was like magic. And that was the whole thing. It did it really, really fast. So zero downtime. If this thing went down, this other thing would do like super redundancy. And so I joined, they're like 80 million revenue. I look across this and basically all their customers fall into one of two buckets. Half of them are retail customers and the other half are utilities. Like these are so different. And I'm like, wow, those are two really different segments, man. Like, why are we selling to these two? But then we go do the customer interviews and the retail guys are all like, well, we care about this. And the retail guys, we happen to have this system. We happen to do backup in this system. And we really care about the hot backup because, cash registers go down. We don't make any money. So we need it to be never down. So that's why we bought it. Then we go to utilities, just weirdness. They happen to use the same two systems in the same two way. And they also care if things go down because the lights aren't on. Now, but when we did the positioning, it was identical competitors, identical differentiators, identical differentiated value. So on the marketing side, occasionally we would run a campaign where we would use a lot of utilities words for the utilities people, and we were targeting the utilities people, or vice versa with the other people. But if you came to our website, and even if you looked at the way our salespeople were pitching, it was one pitch, one storyline, because the story was the same. And all we would change up in the narrative is, if we wanted to show a customer example, if it was retail, I'd show you a retail example. If it was utilities, I'd show you the utilities example. But the narrative through line was the same. So in the companies I've worked with, if that really gets different, then we are on the road to product bifurcation because what these guys want and what these guys want and what we're going to need to continue to build to make those things satisfy the two segments it's going to branch. And so sometimes what we do is, if we had a big platform, we'd say, well, we're going to do a module just for these guys and a module just for these guys. And that's how we're going to handle it. And sometimes we just fork it and branch it and say, nope, it's two products now because we can't serve both of these at the same. So generally, we don't end up with different positioning and different stories for different segments, which is good because that would confuse the heck out of everybody if we did.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Great, Meta. Thanks for your question. And I love that example, April, because a lot of times I use the analogy of like when you're trying to attract a certain kind of target customer, it's like going fishing, and like that's the fish that you're trying to catch, and your product, your positioning is the bait.
Right.
And to your point, you have a thesis or hypothesis pre-launch, but you don't know until you actually throw that bait in the water what kind of fish you're going to catch. They never would expect that we're going to catch utility fish and the other fish, right? It's like, and then you're like, what the heck did this?
I actually use this fish example all the time.
Oh, good. Yeah, me too.
I do. I actually use this fish example all the time. This is my speech that I give about people that want to get their positioning really, really tight at the beginning, right? Is like, we got a thesis, and the thesis, like, let's say I'm making a fishing net. The thesis is the world's greatest tuna fishing net, right?
Right.
But maybe it is, maybe it ain't, man. I haven't tried it out yet. So, I'm better to keep the positioning a little loose at the beginning.
Right.
And you know what, man? It's a net for big fish, all kinds of big fish. And then let's just let all kinds of people use them. We see what they pull up.
Yes.
Maybe what we see in that first wave of customers is, oh, geez, it's actually really good for grouper. That's fantastic. Right. And now I get all tight on it and say, yeah, it's a grouper fishing net, and go nuts and go get that market.
Right. Kind of a related question, Rajesh. It's a related question to the last one, but a little different. There he goes.
There he is.
Yeah, no, it's actually, I kind of covered that with Meda's question. It is pretty much related. So one thing what we face is when we talking to account executives, account managers who are not technical, and when we go and talk to sales engineers who are very technical, who wanted to talk about like how we implement, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So when we do this one, I have seen in the previous jobs, I said, oh, we need anything specific to, when it comes to account executives, you need to put it this way, don't go too technical. But when it comes to, salespeople, they say, oh, we need, what do you solve? Talk about technicality, right? Yeah. And then when you go to the customer also, you have to kind of merge these together. You need to actually, as I said, have to put some level of a value proposition. What problem am I solving? What am I bringing to the table? And then you have to show the technicality as well. So I always see that it's not an easy job, especially as you said, it's selling and buying. I actually sat on all sides of the table, buying and selling. It is so hard. Doesn't matter whatever it is. Especially when it comes to positioning for the product people, it becomes much more challenging. So I thought.
So here's a thing that I think is really important. Like I think that we always have to go from high to low. And where we run into trouble is where we go straight to the deep tech, but we haven't contextualized it. And so I think even if we're dealing with, because I spent a lot of my career selling databases, stuff that's like techie, right? So really techie stuff to a really techie buyer. And we always have to start at the high level story. Like what are we doing here? What are we trying? What is the value? But we should be able to go as deep as the customer wants us to go. And so a good sales pitch, in my opinion, a good narrative on this says, look, we're the only people that can deliver this value, and this value, right? So let's say one of my values is like, let's talk about my hot backup guys, right? So, so we can deliver that, like we are the only people that can give you sub-second response time. If you have these two particular kinds of systems and you want to be able to do the backup and whatever. If I'm saying that to a really technical person, I'm going to lead with the value, but then I have to immediately get into, well, how do you actually do that? Because they care. And they're not going to believe my value until they understand the technical details of it. But the trick is I lead with the value, then I tell you how. I can never get into where we mess this up is we'll say, I have the blah, blah, blah -296 hot backup, whatever standard, and they don't necessarily connect that to sub-second hot backup. So I have to start with the value. This is the value that we deliver. Here's how we do it. And the sales engineers in particular, I think, need to start with that value and then go as deep as the customer wants you to go into how do we do it. Because a technical buyer is often very skeptical and needs to understand the details and also needs to understand, like, how does it work? How does it work with all my stuff right now? How hard is it going to be to integrate? How much technical skill do I need? What kind of technical skill do I need? Blah, 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 all that stuff. And so, but the trick is, like, I think people try to do this where there's like the not technical deck and the technical deck. And I think that's a mistake. Like, I think what we want is the not technical deck, and it just stops before we get to the deep tech stuff. And then if I've got the technical person in the room, we keep going. And we just go deeper on the how, but it's the same narrative. It's just, we're going to get into the guts of the how.
Cool. That sounds good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Thanks for your question, Rajesh. I appreciate it. And I just want to add, I like that idea of starting out with the context. But can we just not agree that blockchain is such an amazing technology? You can go straight to blockchain, April.
That's blockchain. And then we just say, it's blockchain, buddy.
Blockchain. And you sprinkle the pixie dust and their magic just happens. You don't need any context or customer benefits, just blockchain, right?
Then we just go to the blockchain. We're fine.
Yeah.
April, if you don't mind, if I can hijack with one more follow-up on this one, the reason for that particular question is whenever we go this kind of like a same, like a technical and merge it together, what I faced personally was when we get ask from a customer or from the salespeople, it actually comes as a solution. I want to do this. Can you do this? So it never comes as a requirement. So that was also pretty hard for us. So I always think that maybe I didn't position it properly. That's why they're asking for a solution. Even though that doesn't align with my principle, they're asking for it. They pretty much go into it. Just deliver that. So it's that's
I think and there's this danger, right? Like, again, if we're not clear and upfront about the narrative and kind of taking control of that narrative, the customer will do it for us, or even worse, our competitors will do it. They will pollute the customer with their narrative. And then the customer will come back to us and say, well, I just got off the phone with them and they told me these 3 things were really important. How do you do these 3 things?
Yeah, I mean, trust me.
And so if we're doing a good job, like, again, if I take Level Jump as the example, the sales enablement guys, like, they were often the last people in the deal. And so the customer has already talked to the LMS vendor, and the LMS vendor says, you know what you really want? Courses and certification courses. And here's 15 features that we have that no one else has if you're doing certification courses. And so then they come with this checklist of things and say, well, how do you do a certification course? And how do you do this? And how do you do that? And the Level Jump folks had to basically back it all the way up and go, okay, before we say anything, why are we doing sales enablement? Why? Because we want to drive sales. How are we going to drive sales if we can't measure that? I don't care about your whole checklist, because if you can't do this one thing, you failed. And so that's how we get out of that checklist for, right? It's the same thing with Help Scout. They got this customer success stuff. Like Zendesk has 5 million bazillion more features. They do way more stuff. It's a way more mature product. And so if Help Scout doesn't come in at the beginning and say, look, you either care about customer experience or you don't. And if all you care about is driving the cost out of customer service, you should buy Zendesk. Because we can't beat them on that. Oh, yeah. But if you care about the experience, here's all the reasons you don't want Zendesk, man. Like they're gonna treat your people like a ticket. They're gonna drive them to the FAQ. They're gonna like blah 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 blah. And so you gotta fight the fight you can win. And so the problem is if the competitor has got to them first, they're gonna come to you with this checklist and say, well, how come you do all the things? And you're going to have to back up and say, we're talking about a totally different thing here, buddy. Like before we get to the checklist of features, what matters from a value perspective, what matters? And here's how we do that. If I can't get the customer aligned to that story, then I got nothing to sell them, because especially if you're a startup, right? Because there's always somebody out there that's got more things on the checklist.
Oh, true. Yeah. This is why I personally hate RFPs, because RFPs literally does what you are just talking about.
Exactly. Like unless you've worked with them ahead of time to design the RFP, you're going to lose because IBM's beat you or Oracle's beat you, and the RFP is designed for them. And you don't have a chance.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so what you're trying to do again is like the purpose of this narrative is to sort of come in and say, here's how we split up the market. And baked into that, here's how we split up the market is kind of our point of view on what matters. And so, what it should do is kind of crack the customer's head open a little bit to, I never really thought about that as a matter, but yeah.
Well, I think where Jesh brought up a great point, the whole solution space versus problem space, which is a topic I'm very passionate about. And then you showed the hack right there, which is, well, why do you care about that? You're asking for this feature. Why do you care? Yes, why, to figure out why it matters.
Why is that important? Why is that even on your purchase criteria?
Yeah,
like exactly. a good narrative establishes purchase criteria. That's what it really does.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that's what the buyer is struggling with, right? They're like, right. I don't know how to choose between these things. What's important and what isn't? And so a good sales narrative says, like my toilet guy, right? It's like, look, like if it's a toilet in the basement nobody ever uses, then you should buy the $200 one. There's your purchase criteria right there. You don't care about quality. The thing's only going to get flushed 3 times a year. Like, why buy this over-engineered thing over there? You should just buy this. We should be able to do the same thing where we're like, look, like, here's who we're for. Maybe you care about that. Maybe you don't.
Right. Cool. Okay. We have 2 more questions. Next up is JC.
You may have already answered this in another way, but really before I get to the stage for the question, I like how you've been framing this up even from the beginning, because to me, it really is about this communication, not what is stated, but what's understood, by who you're communicating to, and bridging that gap, right? Even from the beginning, and even going to what Dan was talking about, the problem space, we sometimes forget how challenging it is to actually create a very concise communication. It's a lot harder. You have to edit it until it makes sense to the market that you're trying to speak to. So that being said, okay. And like I said, you may have already answered this in a number of ways, but this was asked before. What is the biggest challenge you've experienced as you've worked with organizations, right? You're working with leadership, and are they already bought into what you're selling, or is there hurdles that you've consistently seen that you have to jump over? And if so, what are those? Yeah.
So there's usually a handful of things that trip people up on this stuff. So the first one is most weak sales pitches or weak narratives, weak marketing comes from weak positioning. The weak positioning comes from a misalignment across the team on, we don't all agree on who we compete with. We don't all agree on who's a best fit customer. We don't all agree on what our differentiated value is, right? And so sales thinks sales's idea is a little bit different than marketing, is a little bit different than product, a little bit different than the founder. And usually this comes from, like I work with a lot of growth stage startups, and at a growth stage startup, where this comes from is the founder used to do everything. The founder used to sell everything, whatever. And then the company grew and it got big. And now we've got professional head of sales and a professional head of product and a professional head of marketing. And those people come in and they're like, I don't know, like, I think maybe this is different. And the founder is a little bit stuck in the past sometimes because they're like, the last time they sold a deal was a year ago and they haven't really been involved in a deal since then, right? And then you've got sales, but sales just has sales, right? So that like all they see is the last 2 deals they did, basically. And then you've got product, and product is a little more oriented in the future because they're thinking about roadmap stuff. So they're not always thinking about, well, how do we win a deal today? Because they're a little bit thinking about that. So product is often, they're often tracking competitors that we never see in a deal, for example, because they're a Horizon competitor. We have to worry about them in the future. But when it comes to positioning, I don't actually have to position against them because no customer ever puts them on a short list. So, they're not on a short list. I don't have to position against them. And then you got marketing, and marketing's like, they got their own set of problems. Like usually what marketing's got is like, they just fall in love with somebody else's marketing, right? So they're all like, why can't we do marketing like, competitor XYZ, their stuff is so great, blah, blah, blah. Whether it's working or not, because nobody knows.
Right.
And so it's this misalignment that's usually the problem. And so the companies that get stuck on this, like get really stuck, like to the point where, everything's bad, is usually because you've got somebody in charge that's a little bit out of touch with what's actually happening out in the field, but the other groups don't actually have cohesion either. So sales thinks this, products think this, whatever they got, and everybody's operating in their own little silo and the stuff never comes together. And the CEO is just, angry and like, why doesn't everybody just do it like the way I say?
So, okay, with that being said, so what is the fastest way to make traction to prove how important this alignment is?
Yeah. So usually, and again, and I'll show my bias here is I work generally with B2B companies, and generally B2B, that's sort of a complex sale. So there's salespeople involved. And so if I think about the pecking order of, what keeps the CEO up at night, it's sales. So if I can convince sales there's a problem. So if I go over and hang out in sales and I can identify like, hey, they're comparing us to the wrong competitor. Hey, do you notice it takes 3 calls before they figure out what we're all about? Hey, did you notice people are asking us to back up and do the thing again? Did you notice that? Mm-hmm. And if I can illustrate that to the head of sales to the point where the head of sales says, you're right, this is actually a problem. Then, and so I can convince them. If I can convince them, I can usually have a good conversation with product. Then I go to the CEO and I say, look, I'm not telling you your baby's ugly, right? Like I'm not telling you we're going to take the positioning and throw it out. I'm just saying, I'd like to get a cross-functional group together and look at it. And the first thing the CEO says is, what's the head of sales think? And I say, call him and ask him. The head of sales, call the head of sales. Hey, John, I got April in my office right now. She's saying maybe we should do this thing. And I've already convinced John. And John's like, well, yeah, actually, I noticed this thing and the sales call's happening. And I think maybe we should do that. And then they'll call head of product. Like, what do you think? Well, yeah, that's what it is. But if I just came in as product marketing. Who cares what product marketing thinks? Nobody cares what product marketing thinks, right? So I got to kind of get the other people convinced, and then I run it up the chain. And usually the kicker is sales. It's like, this is actually slowing us down in revenue. And so we don't want that. So the closer I can get to revenue on this stuff, the more clout I have with the CEO. And then again, I usually go in and say, well, I'm not saying we have to change it, because I don't know, maybe it doesn't need to change. Well, I don't know. Let's get everybody together and see. And once we get everybody together, then we can kind of have it out, right? And say, but the trick is, I can't just get everybody together and say, let's just talk about it, right? Like, because what'll happen is it'll just become a battle of opinions, and somebody will walk in and say, well, why does everybody love us? And sales will say one thing and product will say something else, and the CEO says something, and it's just bullshit. So what we actually want to do is get the gang together and then run them through a process that, for as much as it can, takes the opinions out of it, which is why I like the idea of sort of saying, well, who do we got to position against? And then what do we got that they don't have? And then let's translate that into value. Then it kind of is what it is. You can't really argue with that. If we agree these are the competitors, we agree this is what we got that they don't have, then where else does our differentiated value come from? We don't get to just make it up.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, especially if you come up with a rubric, to follow, then we can focus on that and not the emotions that are coming into the room.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So that's great. Thank you so much. One last question, and I'm not going to blow up your mind, Dan. This is really quick. When is your My Section 4 class coming out?
So we're doing one right now. One is happening right now.
Right, cool.
That is, and that's the second one we've run. So there's a new one coming in September, I think, but I haven't seen the dates for that one yet. So we're running one right now. I'm doing a live lecture tomorrow, actually.
All right.
But they tend to spring these things on me like a month out and say, hey, we're going to run and here's the dates, does it work? And I go, yeah, sure. I don't know.
Cool.
This is my video training experiment. I don't know if I like video training or not yet. Jury's out on that. But I think it's good. The feedback I've got from it is good, but the students are all over the place. Like some of them are my regular people, like people inside tech companies that want to do this work. And then there's all kinds of randoms that I'm like, why are you taking this course? I have no idea why.
All right. If people want to learn more, can they learn more at aprildunford.com?
Yes, I don't think I have anything on there about the sprint. I should. I'm being a bad sprint runner, but because Section 4 runs it and whatever, I'm not paying enough attention to it. But if you go to section4.com, you'll see me in there.
There you go.
But aprildunford.com has everything else. I should probably put something on there about this.
Well, I saw it on LinkedIn, so maybe just follow April on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I post once they tell me when it's coming. I post it out on the socials and say,
on the social channels.
The thing is coming. You should sign up.
Awesome.
Great. Okay, thanks, JC. Appreciate it. Okay, and then our last question is from Carol, who's been patiently waiting. So hi, Carol, go for it.
Thank you. April, question for you is when you initially go from the dog food to a private pilot, it's scalable to sit on conference calls with the sales team to get feedback to see if it's resonating or, with the product teams. How do you scale out and when you want to pivot and what metrics do you look at, whether it's qualitative or quantitative? You measured like number of sales calls to close a pitch. What metrics do you use to pressure test whether or not your positioning is resonating?
Yeah, everybody wants metrics on this, right? Like how do we know the positioning is working on and give us the metrics? And generally, I think it's really hard to measure because the only thing we can measure is better or worse. Right? There is no like number pass fail, right? All we can tell is, it used to go like this and now it goes like this. So we'll call this better. So usually when we're doing positioning work, and this is just the way I've done it in the past, which is, you're not going to like this answer because it's not very metricsy, but this is the way I've done it and it's worked is we'll get this cross-functional team together. We'll do the positioning. We will then build a sales pitch deck for the sales team to use. And then I won't roll it out to the whole sales team at that point, because there's nothing the sales team hates more than a new pitch deck, right? So what I would do is I take my best sales rep, and then I would train that sales rep on the new pitch deck. And then we would go to qualified prospects and test it. And so the test would consist of, we'll pitch it. The first few pitches we're doing is we're just fine tuning the deck, because we don't expect it to work perfect at the beginning. So the first few, we're just fine tuning the deck. And then after that, when we're no longer fine tuning the deck, I'm looking at my best sales rep and saying, is that better or worse than the old deck? And that's it. What I hope is that all the good stuff comes after that, right? Which is, I get better quality leads in the front, more better quality leads in the front end. Things should pass through the funnel faster. I should get fewer good quality prospects dropped out. I should get a shorter sales cycle. I should get larger deal sizes. All that stuff should happen. But if I'm B2B, I can't test it. It would take me a year to test that, right? Depending on how long my sales thing is. And I don't have a year, depending on how long it takes me to close a deal. So generally what I would do is instead, and then what some people want to do is they want to take this positioning, translate it into messaging and A/B test messaging on the web page. And that, in my experience with that, is it's terrible. Like because it's impossible to build the test. Because what I'm actually testing is messaging and copywriting and page design, and is this the right traffic, and 1,000 other things. And so if I pass or I fail, I have no idea whether it's because of the positioning. So the easiest thing to do is build a pitch deck, get a very good sales rep, train the sales rep on it, and then sit in on the calls for the first bunch of calls. And you're trying to mind read with customers. Like, do they look like they're getting it? Do they look like they're not getting it? Like, a good sales call feels really good. A bad sales call feels really bad. And then I've got my best sales rep. Like, one thing you can bet on is that the reps like the old pitch better, because they're comfortable with it. They know it. They've memorized it. They're comfortable with it. They always hate a new pitch deck. So if I can take my best sales rep and do a bunch of pitches and have my best sales rep say, you know what, this is good and it's better than the old one, then it's probably really, really, really good. Because that's a high bar, because nobody wants to. And then I've got a sales rep that's trained on the new thing, that's convinced that it works. And if it's my best sales rep, that person is well respected on the sales team. So then I take that person and I say, you go train everybody. And then I use that person to train the rest of the sales team on it. And then I go back to marketing and say, I know this works in a sales thing. All I got to do in my marketing is have that reflect the same story. And so what are we going to do for messaging that tells that story? Because we know that it works with prospects, because we've seen it live in sales calls. So that's how I do it, which is very loosey-goosey, and we're not dealing with a lot of numbers on this.
You can have a tighter causal loop as opposed to, like you said, the copyright, the messaging, A/B test website.
Exactly. And so I've got my best sales rep. So I've kind of controlled for poor salesmanship. and we built this thing that we think should work. We know how well the old one works. And we already established that the old one was a little problematic. So this one should work better than that. If it doesn't, then we've really missed the mark.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Thanks, Carol, for your question. Appreciate it.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So it sounds like we're doing A/B testing of the pitches, but not with chi-squared calculations, just with is it better or worse?
Is it better or worse?
Yes.
And usually what you'll get is like, the sales team are like immediately, we hate it so much.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Or the sales team is just kind of mildly cranky. They're like, and then, they kind of, we kind of like, but your chances of getting the sales team adopted are way higher if they were involved in building it. So we do this as a cross-functional thing, and sales is involved in building it, then they're kind of invested in it, and they tend to be way more open-minded about a pitch they've been involved in building.
Yeah, after today, I think you have a whole other talk on Jedi mind tricks for organizational buy-in, I think. First you talk to sales, then you do this. I like it. Excellent, cool. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. We're done with all the questions. So thank you very much, April, for a great talk, a great fireside chat and Q&A.